Hello there, everybody. I have a little placeholder slide just to make sure that everything is going okay and that we are all set. And I'm just double checking. Okay. Can you tell this is my first time doing a live stream, aside from the many practices that I've been doing today? So, good afternoon and Happy New Year. And my name is Molly Feivel. I am one of the historic interpreters at Claremont State Historic Site. And today I will be talking to you about the photos of Alice Delafield Clarkson Livingston, who was the last mistress of Claremont. So before we get started, just a couple technological things. I will be your disembodied guide today because I could not figure out how to film myself and then switch to sharing the screen, but I think this will work out just fine. Because I have the slideshow going of the photos, I can't see if there are comments or questions or anything like that. So if you do have questions, I will get to them after the presentation. All right. So we start on a very nice photo that Alice did not take. You can tell perhaps by the color and the fact that it was probably taken by an iPhone that this was a modern day photo of Claremont. So the idea for this program came about by just sheer interest in these photo albums. Alice, as I mentioned, was last mistress of this house, and she was an avid photographer, which means that we have tons of photos of hers throughout the house. We have some that we have on display, we had some that we had in the visitor center, and we also have just big albums of her photos. We have photocopies of them so that we can handle them without as much danger to the original photos. And so I would always look through them and just think about how fascinating it was that the pictures that she was taking were the same kinds of pictures that we would be taking today. Pictures of her house, of her daughters, of her pets, things like that. And so there was something very relatable about all of the photos that she was taking. So we're going to take a look at some of my favorite photos from Alice's albums, and I'm hoping in the future to be able to share even more. Let's get started with a little background on Alice. So Alice Delafield Clarkson Livingston was born in 1872, and she was born not too far away from Claremont. She grew up locally and was distantly related to the Livingstons of Claremont. When Alice was a young girl, about in her early teens, she became ill, and today we're pretty sure it was most likely a form of epilepsy. And her family decided that it would be best for her to maybe go and stay in warmer climates. So she went to stay with family members in Italy. And while she was living abroad, Alice developed a deep love for art, specifically sculpture, and just really found admiration for the arts. And that would later sort of dictate parts of her personality and her favorite hobbies. In 1906, she married John Henry Livingston, who was the owner of Claremont and the great-grandson of Chancellor Robert Livingston. John Henry was a distant cousin of Alice's. They were married in New York in 1906, and they had two daughters, Honoria and Janet. These photos were not taken by Alice. The one on the left is a beautiful portrait of Alice as a young woman, and while she was a very talented photographer, she had not quite mastered the art of the selfie. The one on the right is a wedding portrait from New York in 1906. So the first pictures we're going to see of Alice's feature her husband. So these two pictures of John Henry are actually found in the photo album with other portraits of family members and friends. Alice was clearly taking a series of pictures of her friends and people she knew, and they're sort of more staged photographs than we typically see in her photo albums. And what I really like about these pictures is if you've ever done a photo shoot of any kind, one of the things that you do is you're constantly changing aspects of the photo. Try wearing the sweater for this one. Take the sweater off. Open mouth smile. I want to see your teeth. Closed mouth smile. Be serious. Make these different faces. So in the photo on the left, we see John Henry reading his newspaper with his hat on. And then the immediate next photo in the album is John Henry still reading the same newspaper, but he has removed the hat, most likely at Alice's request, because she wanted a slightly different style for the picture. And I like how John Henry is always very serious in all of his photos, but there's something very amusing about the fact that it really is just the same picture, just with and without a hat. We move on to photos of Alice and John Henry's daughters. So Honoria Livingston, Honoria Alice Livingston, was born in 1909, and her sister Janet was born in 1910. They were less than a year apart, about 10 months apart. But despite the fact that they were so close in age, they were very distinct looking girls. So you can usually tell them apart in all of their pictures. That will be proven a false claim, I guess. You can't always tell them apart, as you'll see in one of these photos. But the photo on the left, taken in 1913, we see Honoria on the right and Janet on the left. And this is a pretty formal photo of the girls. They are sitting in either a carriage or a bench made to look like a carriage, and it's sort of more of a almost professional style photo shoot of the girls, like a nice little winter photo of them all bundled up in their coats, smiling, posing nicely. And then on the right, we have a picture taken the same year, 1913, and it's much more candid, much more informal. And we have Janet and Honoria playing in the snow, and they're all bundled up in their snowsuits. And I know I said they were very distinct looking children, but I am not 100% certain who is who in this photo. I asked around, I asked my colleagues, and someone suggested that Honoria is most likely in the foreground. The reasoning being that her hair was curlier when they were children, and that girl seems to have curlier hair. But when they're all bundled up like that, it is a little harder to tell. So here's another group of photos of Janet and Honoria. We're going to see a lot of pictures of them today. So these were taken, I believe, on Valentine's Day in 1914, if I can read Alice's handwriting correctly. So Honoria was recently 5 and Janet was not quite 4. So we have Honoria on the left, posing with her new doll, presumably. I assume this photo shoot was because they've been given these dolls and we're going to sort of take pictures of them with their new toys. And even at a very young age, Honoria knew how to pose for the camera. She's got a very, a slight smile, but a very serious looking, formal, professional photo. She's showcasing the doll to make sure the camera can see it. On the right-hand side of the slide, we have Janet. And as I said, it's about 3 years old at this point, almost 4. And one of two things has happened in Janet's picture. Either while playing with her doll, she has accidentally knocked the hair off of it, and that has made her laugh, and this photo is taken, or she was already laughing and smiling for the photo and in her excitement knocked the hair off the doll. Having the hair be separate from the doll was not terribly uncommon. I would assume it has something to do with cleaning, being able to better maintain the doll. And we actually have a doll in collections here at Claremont where the hair does come off of the doll. But there's something a little chaotic about this picture of Janet, and I just think it is absolutely adorable. She's so happy. She's having so much fun with her doll. And then in the middle photo, this is one of several of the two girls with their dolls. And there were individual shots, and then there were a couple paired shots. And this is very clearly towards the end of the day. We're getting tired of posing for mom's pictures, and we just want to go and play with our dolls. Honoria won't even look at the camera anymore. And as I said, she was so good about looking at the camera and taking very adult-looking photographs. Very good at looking very grown-up. And Janet is just scowling right at the camera. And again, there's a level of realism to this. Of just, they're kids, and we think of, historic children as like, they're always prim and proper and they're always well behaved. But between Janet sort of knocking the hair off her doll and just this absolute being done with photos, I think they're very similar to the toddlers and the young children that we know today. We switch gears a little bit now and we take a look at one of the family pets. So one of the other main subjects of Alice's photos are her pets. She had many different dogs throughout her life and many different cats. And so this is one of the family cats. This was Topaz. And he was living with the family when the girls were young, so in the early 19-teens. And as I mentioned in the caption, what I like about this picture is if I go through my own camera roll on my phone, I will find hundreds of photos of my cats, of my pets. And probably about half of them are them sleeping because they're just so cute. They're so cute all the time when they're curled up on a chair. And so Alice has these two great photos of Topaz. There he is, wide awake and looking at the camera, and then he's settling down for a little nap. And there's also something really interesting about seeing these like historic chairs that, you know, they're collections. You don't sit on them, you can't use them, just being used by a cat. So Topaz will appear again in the slideshow, but I think this is a great photo of just this big, fluffy orange cat that was so loved by the family. We jump forward a few decades to see Felix and Sarah. So Felix the cat, very original name, and Sarah the boxer were the family's pets around the 1940s, 1950s. Sarah was actually with the family from the 30s up until the 50s. She had a nice long life with the family. And again, these are just pretty typical photos that you would see of pets even today. Felix on the left, he's sitting in a planter that's on the ground and just sort of, you know, looks like he might be watching a bird or something. He looks very alert. And I highly doubt Alice got him to pose properly. And on the right we have Sarah sitting on the porch at the house and just sort of hanging out. And then right in the center we have a nice little picture of the two of them taking a nap in the sun. And it's just, again, these are so familiar. These are very familiar photos that we see all the time. And this is also where I was going to mention. I mentioned Alice had a lot of different dogs. And the number we have is at least 20. She owns 20 different breeds of dogs, but multiples of some breeds. And we know that she preferred bigger dogs, but there were some small dogs mixed in there as well. But Sarah was obviously a very beloved member of this family. So we'll go back to the daughters in this one. I will apologize because the chronology of this is a little weird. It does sort of jump all around throughout the family's history. It was really hard to figure out how to group the photos, so they just kind of fell where they may. But here we have Janet and Honoria playing dress up. And again, this is an incredibly familiar game to anyone with children. I know I play dress up all the time. I had a whole box full of hats and costumes. And here they are playing Robin Hood. Honoria on the right is dressed as Robin Hood. She's the oldest, she gets to pick first. And Janet, who is in the bottom left photo, is, I assume, Friar Tuck, based on her clothing options. And then on the top left, we have the two of them facing each other in a very dramatic stance. And again, these are just so nice because you know they got dressed in these costumes, they were going to go play Robin Hood, and their mom was like, hold on. Alice wanted to make sure she got some pictures of them all dressed up. And so these are in 1918. So we go back a little bit in their childhood to when they're a little bit younger. These pictures are from 1915. And it shows some more pastimes that the girls engaged in. So in the center photo, you see one of them climbing what appears to be a pole of some kind. We're pretty sure it's Janet. That seems like a much more Janet-like activity. And that would be on the family's property in South Carolina. And on the left and right, we have pictures of the girls playing with a hoop and a stick. And on the right, it does look like Janet is about to hula hoop, but she is not. They are playing a game that was actually fairly popular in the colonial era as well, in which you have a hoop and a stick and you sort of race them and try to keep the hoop standing. It's very difficult. We play historic games with kids here sometimes for camp and things like that, and it is a very difficult game. But there they are, hanging out, standing on a porch with their hoops. And again, it's just kids playing, and of course their mother is going to take pictures of them. Up next we have some more photos of the girls. On the left-hand side, we have a picture of Janet and Honoria with John Henry. Honoria is standing, Janet is sitting in his lap. And there aren't a ton of photos of John Henry with the girls, but the ones that do exist are very sweet. He's a very serious man. You can see that in his pictures. And by the time they were born, he was kind of an older dad. Alice was his third wife. He had already had a child many years older than these girls. But by all accounts, he was a very loving father, and they really enjoyed spending time with him. And so these sweet little photos to have with him, I think they're very nice, because he always looks so formal, but just the way Janet is just like lounging, it's sweet. And then on the right-hand side, we have a pretty good example of two sisters. 1919, 1920, so a few years after the picture with John Henry, you see Honoria reading, and Janet's just sort of standing over her shoulder, and the look on her face just tells me that she is about to either say something or poke Honoria or something like that, and they are just so clearly sisters in this photo. And I just really enjoy, you can even see on Honoria's face a little bit of the, okay, go away, I just want to read my book, and just typical little sister behavior. So we're jumping forward again to when the girls are older and they're grown, and doing a nice little montage of the women of the house with pets. So on the left we have Janet with Felix. This is most likely in the 1940s. On the right is Honoria with Missy, who was her Skye Terrier. That's taken around the 1950s. And right in the center, we're in the early 19-teens. And I'm not 100% sure who the woman in this photo is, but my guess is that it's Alice, and she's holding Topaz. And I really love this picture because it's so artistic, and she looks like she's posing for a painting. Topaz is sort of looking off into the distance, and you've got a little bit of her profile, and there's just something very elegant about that center photo. And, well, at the same time, it's a woman just holding her cat, holding Topaz, because, you know, sometimes we have to pick up the cat. And these are just, I think, really nice pictures of the women of the house with their pets. Speaking of pets, we are in 1917, and the family had two Pekingese dogs, named Peggy and Goby. And this could be either one of them, honestly, I have no idea. But these might be my 3 favorite photos in the entire album. There is something so completely adorable and weirdly majestic about this little dog with its ears flopping around and just its tongue stuck out in all of these pictures. And it's just the tiniest little dog. And these are 1,000% pictures I would take of my pets, just sort of wandering around, like the slightly blurry one on the right, like the dog is clearly just running towards Alice. And there's just something so sweet about this. And Peggy and Goby are actually immortalized in another way in the house. Alice made a relief of her daughters with Peggy and Goby and their nurse Ollie. So I mentioned that when Alice was living in Italy, she was very interested in sculpture. And later in her life, she took her girls, and she and John Henry took the girls to live in Italy for a little bit of time. Excuse me. And she picked up modeling clay for her daughters, and she actually gave it a try herself and found that she really enjoyed sculpting. And so this relief that she sculpted sits above the fireplace in the study today. And so you have Janet and Honoria, and their nurse Ollie is in the center, and then Peggy and Goby are on either end. And it's a nice, again, these same subjects are in all of her art: her children, her pets, the people she loves. Up next, we have more photos of the girls. They are older than in some of these other photos. These were taken in 1954, and Honoria is on the left, Janet is on the right, and there's also a cat in the picture with Janet in the bottom right-hand corner, though I cannot quite tell which cat that is. So what I like most about these pictures are that the porch at Claremont has kind of always been a backdrop for photos. This is the front porch of the house, and the lions are on either side, and it's a beautiful location to take pictures. And as I mentioned in the caption, like, we still do that today. We still take pictures right there in that location. I've done it several times this year. And just the idea that the girls would get all dressed up, that Honoria and Janet would put on their fancy dresses, and their mother would take photos of them. In 1931, Honoria married a gentleman by the name of Reginald McVitie, who went by Rex. They got married here at Claremont on the grounds. Janet was a member of the wedding party. We have photos from that day. But my favorite photo of Rex and Honoria is the one on the top right here. They went to Ireland for their honeymoon to visit his family. And while they were on the Europa, traveling to Ireland, they played foosball. And if you've taken a tour at Claremont, particularly with me, you have definitely seen this photo because, as I said, this is my favorite picture of the two of them, and it is easily my favorite photo that we have on display at the site because it's fun. It's just a fun picture. We see all these pictures of Honoria and Janet playing games when they're kids, and there's something very free and sweet about that. But there's these two adults who've just gotten married and they're heading off on their honeymoon and they're playing foosball, which I was unaware had been around for this long. The photo on the left shows Honoria and Rex in the gardens. I found quite a few photos of Honoria and Rex that I really liked, so they get a second slide. And so I say in the caption that their marriage is rumored to have been a failed attempt at a transatlantic pairing. So in the early 20th century, particularly in the 1920s and 30s, we're looking Gilded Age time, the best kind of marriage for a young, rich American girl would be to marry a noble, a European noble, a lord. So you would have these American heiresses who had family money, and they would go to Europe and they would marry a man with a title. So you were getting this perfect marriage of nobility and wealth. And you sort of, you may be an American heiress and you may have a ton of money, but you could really use that title. Wouldn't it be great to be Lady Livingston? So Rex and Honoria met at a nightclub in New York City, and his family was from Ireland. They owned a castle there. Honoria was a Livingston. And so I think the general idea, we believe, was they were hoping to make one of these transatlantic marriages between nobility and wealth. And it turned out that the castle that his family owned was basically in ruins. They just could say they owned a castle, but it wasn't, functioning or anything like that. And Honoria's family, the Livingstons, had been living off the family wealth since the early to mid 1800s, and so there was no income. There was no money coming into the family. So they were well off, but they were by no means as well off as they once had been. And so it's not very successful as a transatlantic marriage with that title. But Rex and Honoria genuinely loved each other. And we have these great photos of them, and I particularly love the one all the way on the right of them sitting on the boat. They seem to just be sitting on the deck of a boat and just smiling at each other, and there's just something really sweet about that. Or the one in the middle where Honoria's not looking at the camera, she's looking at Rex. And they genuinely loved each other, which, again, it's very apparent, I think. We have some more photos of Honoria. There are quite a lot of her throughout this album, and I just sort of narrowed it down to some of my favorites. So the one on the left-hand side is obviously one of my favorites because there's Honoria with a cat again, sitting in a car, holding a Siamese cat. And again, this family, they love their animals so much. And on the right-hand side, we have Honoria in the gardens here at Claremont. And this is one of several photos that Alice took in 1955. And they're all sort of posed, and Honoria's looking off into the distance, or they're in profile, and I just think this one is so beautiful. She's so stately. And Honoria lived until she was 91 years old, and if you have seen the introduction video that we used to show in the visitor center, there was an interview with Honoria, and you could see even well into her 80s, she was still this tall, stately, again, I can't think of a better word to describe her, woman, and she just carried herself with such poise and grace, and I think Alice really captures that in me. And the same with Janet. So when you look at the pictures of Janet as she gets older, she's much more serious than Honoria. Honoria isn't necessarily smiling all the time in her photos, but there's always sort of the term, I guess, would be smize. She's smiling with her eyes. You can see a little bit of a smirk, and they're very, she's presenting herself to the camera. She's posing for the camera. And Janet always seems a little less comfortable doing that. And it's really interesting because when they were younger, of course, Janet was ham. She was a complete ham, smiling for the camera all the time, playing around, laughing, just so clearly. And as she gets older, she gets a little more serious in her photos, which is why I really like the one on the left here. In 1934, we've got Janet sort of sitting on what looks like a table, and she's smiling a little bit, and it just, it seems like it's caught her off guard. And she does look more serious in the picture on the right, which is in 1955. But there she is with family pet. And there's just so many pictures of the people in this family with their pets, and they obviously mean so much to them. So as we get near the end of this slideshow, I've got two more pictures of the sisters here. And I mean, it's very clear Alice was taking pictures of her daughters from the time they were little girls up until they were adults, up until she passed in the 1960s. And it's so wonderful to see that that timeline. You get to see them as these toddlers, you get to see them playing with their dolls, you get to see them, like on the left, holding Topaz, who, full disclosure, when I first took this picture of the picture, I could not tell what animal I was looking at, and I thought that was a giant rabbit. And then when the lighting was better, I was like, oh, that's Topaz. He's so fluffy that I just wasn't sure. But, so you have these pictures of them with their pets or playing their games, and then as they get older, she's still taking pictures of them on the grounds at their home, and with Honoria with her husband, and Janet with the pets, and just kind of, she's still documenting their lives. And I think it's very clear what was so important to Alice. And the answer is her daughters, her pets, her home, her family. Like, that's what we see throughout all of these pictures. And like I said earlier, this is a fraction of the photos that she took, and maybe there will be a part 2 to this, but these were the ones pulled today. So I will leave you with one more picture of Janet and Honoria, and it is taken on the stone wall that's right outside Claremont. And if you walk out the front door at Claremont, you see this stunning view of the Hudson River, and there's a little stone wall that sits outside there. And it's just the perfect backdrop. That view is absolutely stunning. It is gorgeous every day. And there's Janet and Honoria sitting on it. And I think this picture really stands out to me because we've got this beautiful backdrop, we've got those Catskills that have been there this whole time, that are still there now, that heck, I take pictures of most days. We all do. It's so beautiful looking out across the river. And so Alice clearly knew that that was just a great backdrop to take a picture of her daughters using. And you can tell we agree because we are still using that same backdrop today. This is a picture from Halloween. Our staff does not usually dress like this. But when we take our Halloween pictures, we sit on that stone wall, and there are those same Catskills right behind us. So you sort of get to see how much has changed and yet how little has changed. And I just think that's very refreshing. So just a couple of thoughts before we wrap up. I mentioned how familiar these photos are and how, a woman in the early 20th century taking pictures of her pets is just very amusing to me because it's so relatable. And we all do this all the time, take pictures of our pets and of our kids. And so that is one reason that I think these photos are so interesting and fantastic to have. But I think the other thing is that a lot of times history doesn't always feel accessible. When we talk about the Livingston family here at Claremont, we talk about Chancellor Livingston. He helped write the Declaration of Independence. We talk about John Henry Livingston. He was descended from this great family. He was a rich man who owned this house, and he put portraits of his ancestors on the walls, and here's the furniture they have and all of this. And that's really nice. That's a great story. It is an incredibly historically important story, and it matters so much to the history of this country, the history of this area, and things like that. But I think a lot of times it's hard to view these people as real people. We tend to think of them as these stories, these historical figures where we talk about them and the Chancellor is this mythical creature who helped write the Declaration. And that's really great. That's really cool. But did he have pets? What did he like to read? What was his favorite food? And so we have access to some of that for some of the earlier generations with, diaries and letters and things like that. But what Alice has provided us with is just a concrete image of who these people were. Because even though a lot of these photos, you've got them staged, you still have these candid photos of the girls playing in the snow. You've got pictures of them playing games, climbing trees, playing with their pets, running with the dog. And suddenly they feel like real people. I can say I know that Honoria loved doing this. I know Honoria really loved dogs. I know that she enjoyed playing dress up as a little kid, and most likely enjoyed reading stories about adventures and Robin Hood and things like that. And so to be able to look at these stories and these, excuse the pun, snapshots of their lives makes it feel more real to us. Seeing Rex and Honoria play foosball on a boat is so relatable and makes them feel like real people that you could know. And I just think that's very important for learning history and learning about history and teaching history, is to have that resource. And so we're very grateful to Alice for that. We're grateful to Alice for a couple things. She's the one who deeds the house to the state in the 60s, which is kind of a big deal for us. But yeah, I think we're very grateful that she took all of these photos and that she provided us with such a nice look into her family's life here at Claremont. So I think that about does it. As I said, possibly I will upload some more of these photos at some point, make a blog post or something like that. And if you had any questions, I will go back and answer them now. And I'll probably try to upload these slides to the Facebook page so you can sort of look at them a little bit longer and not just be at my whim of skipping through slides. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day and a happy new year. And we'll see you next.